Hello friends, in this video we are going to learn about nested loops in Python. So a nested loop is a loop inside another loop. The main principle of nested loops is for each iteration of the outer loop, all iterations of inner loop are executed. So let's flip to Jupyter Notebook and let's see some examples of nested loops. Okay, let's say we want to print a pattern like this. To achieve this, we will go step by step. So now let's not focus on the entire pattern. Let's go step by step. Let's say first we want to print only this one row, the first row. Now, how many stars does the first row contain? The first row contain 4 stars, right? So we can easily print the first row by using a loop that has 4 iterations, and in each of the iterations we will use a print statement. In that way we can easily print a single row, right? So let's flip to Jupyter Notebook. Okay, before starting with the code, let me tell you there is a function called a range function in Python which gives you consecutive integers, a sequence of consecutive integers. So range n gives you all the consecutive integers starting from 0 to n minus 1. So if we write range 4, this actually represents a sequence of integers from 0 to 3. So let's use a for loop on this sequence. For I in range 4, print I. So if we execute this cell, you can see it prints 0, 1, 2, 3. So range n means all the integers starting from 0 and ending at n minus 1. Fine. So we will use this concept in our nested loop. Okay. So what were we saying? We were trying to print the first row of this pattern, and the first row contains 4 stars. So we can easily do this using a for loop which has 4 iterations. So this for loop itself has 4 iterations. So all we have to do is that we have to change the print statement inside. Instead of printing I, we will print star. So if we run the cell, there is a problem, right? Instead of the stars getting printed side by side, each of the stars is getting printed in a separate line. But that's not what we want. But why is this actually happening? This is happening because the print function in Python by default ends with a new line character. So there is an end parameter in the print function, the default value of which is a new line character. So to avoid this new line at the end of each star, what we can do, we can replace the default value of the end parameter and we can assign the end parameter with an empty string. In that case, the new line will not be introduced after each print statement. So if we run the cell now, you can see the stars are getting printed in the same line. So we have printed our first row. Now all we have to do is that we have to repeat this row 4 times. So for that, what we have to do? Whatever code we have written so far, we have to enclose that inside another loop. And that loop also should have 4 iterations. So let's flip to Jupyter Notebook again. And let's enclose this entire code inside another loop. Okay, so let's have another loop for I in range 4. Okay, now this loop and this loop cannot have the same iterator variable. So let's change the name of this iterator variable to j. Okay, and one more thing is that this loop is nested inside this loop. So we have to add an indentation for this loop. So let's add a tab here and let's add a tab here. So this clearly indicates that this loop is nested inside this loop. So we have enclosed our previous code inside another loop which also has 4 iterations. Now if we run the cell, you can see we do not get the expected output yet. All the stars are getting printed in the same line. Now why is this happening? This is happening because instead of repeating our row in 3 different lines, we are repeating our rows in the same line. So let's see what is actually happening. So we initially had this row only. Now what we were trying to do, we were trying to repeat this row in 3 more lines like this, but that actually is not happening. What is happening is that we are repeating this, but we are repeating it in the same line like this, and like this. So that's why all the stars are being printed in the same line. So what we have to do, after printing a complete row before going for the next iteration, we have to print a new line. So here we complete one row, then we print a new line, then we complete another row, then we again print a new line, then we complete another row, then we again print a new line, and then we complete the last row. That's how we have to execute it. Now let's flip to Jupyter Notebook again and let's see what modification we have to do in our code. Now, which segment or which code snippet prints one complete row? This is the code snippet that we wrote earlier. This code snippet prints one complete row. So what we have to do? We have to introduce a new line character after this code snippet. So let's write a new line here or print a new line character here, and we can do that by just using a print statement, because as I just mentioned, the default value of the end parameter of print statement is a new line. So if we just use a print statement here, it will print a new line. Now what happens? One complete row is printed, a new line character is printed, and then again one complete row is repeated. So that's how it will work. Now if we run the cell, it gives us the desired output. Now if you have not completely understood what is actually happening, don't worry at all. I will again copy the entire code to Spider IDE, and there with the debugging tools available in Spider, I will show you line by line execution of what is actually happening. So we have created a new file here, and here we will paste our code. So you have to be in the Variable Explorer tab so that you can track the change of the variables and their values. So let's start our debugging session by pressing Ctrl plus F5, and you can see a small arrow is pointing to the first line of our code. Okay, so what did we say in our slide? We said that for each iteration of the outer loop, all the iterations of the inner loop will be executed. Now what does that mean in this context? For each iteration of this loop, all the iterations of this loop will be executed. So this loop will have 4 iterations for I equal to 0, 1, 2 and 3, and this loop will also have 4 iterations for j equal to 0, 1, 2 and 3. And for each iteration of this loop, that is for I equal to 0, j equal to 0, j equal to 1, j equal to 2 and j equal to 3, these 4 iterations of the inner loop will be executed. Again for I equal to 1, these 4 iterations of the inner loop will be executed. For I equal to 2, the same thing will happen, and for I equal to 3, again 4 iterations of the inner loop will be executed. So let's see that in action. So to move to the next line, we will press Ctrl plus F10. Okay, so as we move to the next line, you can see in the variable explorer, a variable with the name I has been created and its current value is 0. Why is its current value 0? Because in this sequence, the first value is 0, and that is the value that I is currently containing. So the current value of I is 0. Okay, so after entering the outer loop, we encountered this line. So if we again press Ctrl plus F10, it will now enter the inner loop. And you can see a new variable j has been created and the initial value of that variable is 0. Fine. So if we press Ctrl plus F10 again, you can see a star has been printed due to this print statement. Okay, so we have completed the first iteration of the inner loop. Now we will start the second iteration of the inner loop. If we again press Ctrl plus F10, you can see the value of j changes from 0 to 1, right? Which means the second iteration of the inner loop has been started. But you can see the value of I is still unchanged to 0, which means we are still inside the first iteration of the outer loop. But the second iteration of the inner loop has been started. Now if we again press Ctrl plus F10, another star is printed, which you can see here. Again it goes back to the first line of the inner loop. Again if we press Ctrl plus F10, you can see the value of j changes from 1 to 2. Again if we press Ctrl plus F10, it prints another star, it goes back to the first line, again enters the inner loop and again prints another star. So all the 4 stars of the first row have been printed, and we have completed all the iterations of the inner loop for I equal to 0. As all the iterations of the inner loop have been completed for I equal to 0, the control will no longer enter inside the loop, inside this inner loop. So it will come directly from line number 2 to line number 4. So if we press Ctrl plus F10 again, it comes from line number 2 to line number 4. Now in the line number 4, we have a print statement which will print a new line character. If we execute this line by pressing Ctrl plus F10, you can see the cursor has moved to the next line, which means a new line character has been printed. So first iteration of the outer loop has been completed. Now we will start the second iteration of the outer loop. If we again press Ctrl plus F10, you can see here the value of I changes from 0 to 1, which indicates second iteration of the outer loop has started. Now for I equal to 1, we will again enter the inner loop, and we have entered the inner loop. You can see the value of j getting changed to 0. That means the inner loop has started again. Okay, we will again move to the next line. You can see the first star has been printed in the second line, which means the first iteration of the inner loop for the second iteration of the outer loop has been executed. So we again press Ctrl plus F10. We are currently in the second iteration of the inner loop, and the value of j changes from 0 to 1, and the value of I remains unchanged to 1. Okay, so we again press Ctrl plus F10, another star is printed. Again it enters the inner loop, the value of j gets changed, again a star is printed, the value of j again gets changed, again a star is printed. So all the 4 stars of the second iteration or second row have been printed, which means for I equal to 1, we have completed all the iterations of the inner loop. So again the control will go from line number 2 to line number 4, and it again prints a new line character. So now the third iteration of the outer loop will be started. We press Ctrl plus F10 and you can see the value of I has changed from 1 to 2, which means the third iteration of the outer loop has started. So again it will enter the inner loop, and inside the inner loop all the stars will be printed one by one like this. So again all the iterations of the inner loop have been completed for I equal to 2. So the control will again go to line number 4 and prints a new line character. Then again a new iteration of the outer loop will be started, and you can see the value of I has changed from 2 to 3. So a new iteration of the outer loop has started, and it enters the inner loop and prints all the stars again. And after completing all the iterations of the inner loop, it comes to line number 4 and again prints a new line character. Now we have completed all the iterations of the outer loop as well. We have completed all the iterations, that is for I equal to 0, 1, 2 and 3. So as all the iterations are completed, if we again press Ctrl plus F10, our code execution will end here, as you can see with the return statement. And now if we again press Ctrl plus F10, our debugging session will end. So that's how a nested loop works. Okay, in this example, what were the rules of the outer loop and the inner loop? The outer loop helped you to move from one row to another row by printing a new line character in each iteration. And what did the inner loop do? The inner loop helped you to print the stars side by side in a single row. So we can say that the outer loop was representing the rows, whereas the inner loop was representing the columns or the stars. So instead of printing 4 rows, if we want to print 3 rows, we'll simply change our outer loop and we'll make it 3. And if we run the cell, you can see now only 3 rows are getting printed. Again, instead of printing 4 stars per row, if we want to print 5 stars per row, we will change in the inner loop. And if we again run the cell, you can see now 3 rows and 5 stars in each row is getting printed. So that's how it works. Okay, let's say instead of printing a square or a rectangle like this, we want to print a triangular shape like this. It will be like this: star, then double star, then triple star, then 4 stars, and like this. So we want to print a triangular shape like this. So in this case, you can see the number of stars in each row are not equal like before. In this row we have 1 star, in this row we have 2 stars, in this row we have 3 stars, and that's how it goes. So for this code or this pattern, we cannot use a constant number inside the range function of the inner loop, right? Here we could use a constant number 5 because in each of the rows we wanted to print 5 stars. But in this case, the number of stars in each row is not equal. So we cannot use a constant number inside the range function. Now from this pattern, can you find any relation between I and j? That is, can you find any relation between the number of row and the number of stars present in that row? So in 0th row we have 1 star, in row number 1 we have 2 stars, in row number 2 we have 3 stars, and in row number 3 we have 4 stars. So if we indicate a row by I, then the number of stars present in that row is I plus 1, right? So for the 0th row, we have 0 plus 1, that is 1 star. For the row number 1, we have 1 plus 1, that is 2 stars. For row number 2, we have 2 plus 1, that is 3 stars, and so on. So we have to modify this code a bit for printing this pattern. So in this case, our inner loop will look like this for j in range I plus 1, because I is our row number and the number of stars in ith row will be I plus 1. So if we comment all the other code by pressing Ctrl plus 1, and if we run only this code, you can see we get this triangular pattern printed, and we can obviously change the number of rows as our wish. We can change it to 5, 6 or whatever. If we again run the cell by pressing F5, it will give us the desired output. So that's how, by finding the relation between I and j, that is the number of row or the index of the row and the stars present in a particular row, you can print a particular pattern. So now that we have got some idea about the nested loop, let's discuss a more advanced example. So let's say we want to print a pattern like this. So this is basically the mirror image of our previous pattern. In this case, apart from counting the number of stars in each row, we also have to count one more thing. And what is that? We also have to count the number of blank spaces in each row. So if the total number of row is 5, in the 0th row we have 1, 2, 3, 4, that is 4 blank spaces. In the row number 1 we have 1, 2, 3, that is 3 blank spaces. In the next row we have 1, 2, that is 2 blank spaces. In the next row we have 1, and in the last row we don't have any blank space at all. So if the total number of rows is equal to n, then we can write the number of blank spaces in ith row is equal to n minus I plus 1. So let's verify this. In the 0th row we have 5 minus 0 plus 1, that is 4 blank spaces. Similarly, in the second row we have 5 minus 1 plus 1, that is 3 blank places. Similarly, for the other rows we also have n minus I plus 1 blank spaces. And if we change the value of I, the blank spaces get changed. And for the last row, we don't have any blank space at all, right? So in this case, inside the outer loop, we need 2 inner loops. One inner loop will take care of the blank spaces and the other inner loop will take care of printing the stars. So let's modify the above code. Let's comment out everything above by pressing Ctrl plus 1, and let's modify our previous code. And here, instead of taking 5, we will take n. We prefer to take the input from the user itself. So let's say the user has entered some value. It can be 5, 6, 7 or whatever. So instead of one inner loop, we will have 2 inner loops. Now, what do we have to print first? Do we have to print blank spaces first, or print the stars first? we first have to print the blank spaces, then we have to print the star. So the inner loop for the blank spaces will come above the inner loop for the stars. So we copy this inner loop here and paste it here, and the condition for this loop will be, let it be k, and the condition for this loop will be n minus I plus 1, right? And instead of printing star, we will print blank space, right? And this will be the inner loop for printing the stars, which will remain unchanged. Now if we run our cell, we get the desired output, and obviously the output will change based on the user input. Let's say now the user has given input 7, and if we again run the cell, it gives us 7 rows. So that's how, with the help of nested loops, we can print different patterns. So in the exercise problems, I will give you many of such exercises so that you get accustomed to this concept. So friends, that's it for this video. I have given you some exercise problems. You may face some difficulty to solve some of these problems, and that is completely fine because you are completely new to the concept of nested loop. So if you face any difficulty to solve any problem, please let me know that in the comment section, and I will come up with a solution of that problem. If you have liked my video, please subscribe to my channel so that you get notified when I upload more Python and data science related videos. And please don't forget to like and share my videos so that others also get benefited from this. Thanks a lot for watching.